I'm going to write down all the just notes for every 10 years. So,
Okay.
and then I'll ask you about those things as while we do the video.
Wish my throat was better.
So 1927.
1927.
That's when you were born.
I was born in 1927
What?
in Clarkston,
Now,
Utah.
Yeah, but what month and?
Oh. Good for you reminding me. I was born in May of 1927 in Clarkston, Utah. May 6th.
And your mom and dad?
My mother's name was Annie Jardine Thompson, and my dad Herman Samuel Thompson.
Who were they?
And they were happy to welcome a new little baby girl into the family.
So who was their parents?
My father was Hannah Jensen, and my grandfather was John Thompson.
Okay. And do you recall who their parents were, or is that?
Oh no, I
Okay.
can't. I'd have to get genealogy out for that.
What about your mom's side?
My mother, she was born in Clarkston, and her father was James Jardine, and her mother was Annie Hagee Jardine, and my great-grandfather was John Jardine, who went into Clarkston when they were first settling out there, and he was the bishop for 25 years.
Now, didn't he settle at one time in Wellsville?
Wellsville, yes, he did.
So what happened there?
He was in Wellsville, and then they asked him if he would go to Clarkston.
That's when they were settling the whole valley here
Yes,
in Cache Valley.
and he left and went to Clarkston, and he took my grandfather, James B. Jardine, with him, and he remembers at that time when he was in Clarkston with my great-grandpa that they were offered to eat and have dinner with my grandmother, Annie Jardine, or Annie Hagee Jardine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he first met her
How old was she
as a
then?
young girl, but I have no clue how old she would be, but he was old enough to go with his father at that time.
So when they were in Wellsville, also his father was James, or
John.
John. And John, is he the one that was with Wilford Woodruff in jail?
Yeah, he was for
Polygamy.
practicing polygamy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he's got I have a picture of them in
Now
in
tell me
jail.
about Wilford Woodruff.
Wilford Woodruff was the
Woodruff.
president of the church at the LDS church at that time.
And was he in jail
He
also?
was in jail with him.
I had no idea.
And Larry Jardine has the journal that while they were in jail that he kept.
Oh my gosh. I did not know that.
So anyway, what were the conditions like? When did they arrive into Wellsville?
Oh, the conditions were not good. I mean, it was hard for everybody. This is what I've heard from my mother and people around me at that time. But they said the conditions were bad. People were born in dugouts, and the winters were bad. It was hard for people.
I think I remember reading in a journal where Grandpa Jardine in the spring was able to pull up some potatoes and tasted the potatoes and felt that was the best treat ever.
I never heard that story before.
Yeah, I think it's in one of the journals.
Okay. You've probably been reading more journals than I have.
So the first 10 years of your life, what was it like?
I just always remembered, I guess I was the baby of the family. They said they really did spoil me. And I know when Dad was buying wheat and seed, he couldn't ever get away without me. I was running and he'd put me in the car and take me with him. And other than the first 10 years, I can remember we used to go to the farm in Whites Valley while he did the farm work.
The whole family?
Yes, well, not the whole family. It seemed like Nina stayed behind with Grandma at times and stayed with Grandma Jardine. But Herman was doing the farm work, and we'd go out and stay 2 weeks while they farmed. And Mother went so she could cook and take care of.
What type of house was there in
Out,
Whites Valley?
out in Whites Valley, it was an old 2-story with an upstairs that was petitioned off, and there was 2 bedrooms upstairs. But there was also 1 bedroom where the kitchen was. There was a bedroom off from the kitchen, and then you'd have to go outside, and there was a lean-to, and there was a room that there was a little coal stove, but you could cook on it, and the oven you had to open it from the side instead of the front. And I remember that little stove because somebody went out there and was going to retrieve it, and it was already gone. Somebody gone in and taken it.
Oh, wow.
As we got older. But there was a bed, and then after that, that's where Mother took and made the bed and took the food, and we would take Herman out and leave him so he'd have a place, and he would stay in that 1 room by himself. Because we would go out with my Uncle Joe and Aunt Sil Goody and Uncle Newell and Aunt Amy Thompson. But I remember Uncle Joe Goody and Aunt Sil.
Did you have a well there, a water well?
Yes, we
Whites
had
Valley was
just
quite
just outside the door of the old house. We'd have to go out and we'd put water in. I remember we had to put water in and pump in order to get it started.
Prime it.
Yeah, I guess that's what you would call priming, in order to get something to eat. And at the side, there was what we just always called them the outhouse, our bathroom facility. And then we had it seems like I can remember that there was either a little coop or something there. I can't remember if it was, but then to get down to the house, we had to go down this kind of a longer driveway. But right up on the road before we turned to go down, there was this big building where they kept everything for the horses and the plows and all of that in there, and that's where they'd work on.
Was it hot?
Well, I can't remember. We had tumbleweeds and weeds, and I mean, it was just...
Lots of sagebrush.
Yeah, a lot. And I guess I shouldn't say this, but way back in those days, they'd kill a sage hen. And ooh, they were good. They'd cook them up for our meals, too. And, but out there was a lot of relatives. Not a whole lot, but we had Uncle Edward and Aunt Edith Godfrey, and Aunt Edith was my dad's sister. And then there was, I'm trying to think. It was Brian Sparks and his wife and family, and Brian was my dad's sister's boy, and he had a place and a farm out there. And then the Hunsakers, and there was 2 families of Hunsakers out there that we became very close to, and was over the years. And then I'm trying to think. You could go either back in towards Tremont to come into Whites Valley, or we could go up through Johnson Canyon and down into Plymouth and up over the Sharp Divide back home into Clarkston.
That was quicker.
And that was a faster way of going.
So what were the living conditions like? It's nowhere comparable to what we have today.
Oh.
So your mom and dad must have
lived
rough.
You mean out at the farm, or?
Out at the farm.
Out at the farm, we had this one big kitchen and a great big table and the coal stove, and yes, I mean, we had a great big tin tub, but I grew up even in Clarkston in an older home and had my baths in the tin tub.
Those tin tubs are what, 3 feet in diameter and about 2
Well,
feet
they
deep?
were, I mean, you could be, your feet, these was just little, but as you grew, why, it was hard, but they were fairly good size.
Yeah. And what else do you remember from 1927 to the first 10 years, 1937?
I just remember Clarkston and all the snow in the winter time and all the children in the neighborhood, and we'd all get together and sleigh ride, and we just played and had lots and lots of fun. And we called it Kid Alley.
Kid Alley?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the triangle that you used to?
And then up farther north it was called, let's see, Sugar House.
Sugar House.
But I don't know where it dropped off. It just took in maybe about 2 blocks, and there was the Christensen family, and then there was Lauren and Lou Jean Thompson, and myself, and there was Arita, and there was Darwin and Oris Goody. Oh, I'm trying to think of all of us that was in that one neighborhood that we used to have lots of fun.
Who lived straight north of Dallas and Sybil?
Right, across the street
the street.
south was Uncle Lou and Aunt Lottie that lived there. And that's where we had the path from our house going out through our barn and over the roadway into where they lived. And we were back and forth all the time.
You had a little path, a trail
Yes,
that was made
a
through
trail, right,
the field.
yeah.
And it would go from Dallas's place to their place to...
Well, no, it would go right from our place across the street, and then my sister Sybil and Dallas's home was just kind of kitty-cornered across the street.
Yeah.
And that was the Rasmussen home. Phil and, oh dear, I'm so old now, I can't remember. Bessie. And she was Bessie Barson and Phil Rasmussen. But that's who I think first had that home.
Uh-huh.
And they were good friends of Mama and Dad's.
And then the Barsons finally probably built to the east,
And
on
then-
the corner.
Then the Barsons, that was family members that built as you come into Clarkston, and then as you got over to the corner, that was a Barson home, and across the street was Phil and Bessie Rasmussen's home.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all of the Barsons on that block, and Grandpa Barson lived on that block.
So who was it that actually settled Clarkston? Because Grandpa Jordan
He
went
came
there when-
after they were there, after
Yeah,
they
after
were
it was
all there
settled.
living, and after it was settled. Well, I think Clarkston was named after a Clark, but was he? I can't.
Denzel?
No, he'd be a relative.
Uh-huh.
Denzel would be now. I've got that history that's wonderful, that tells you all of that. That's the Clarkston history that just came out.
Oh, the new book.
The new book. And you can read that if
Yeah.
you'd like to.
What happened? What about 1937? When was the Depression?
Oh, it was even when I was born, and then it went into a few years. And I remember we were all the same. I mean,
Everybody struggled the
we
same.
struggled the same. It was hard times. And I remember when they had I think it was PTA, or where they had jobs that people could do jobs and make money.
They would build outhouses, wouldn't
And
they?
they would build outhouses. They'd come and build us a new outhouse. And that's how they made money to survive. We had our farm, and I don't know if my dad at that time was buying and selling. I don't think he was. Well, he could have been. He would have been at my age, buying and selling wheat and
Mm-hmm.
besides the farm. So
Yeah. So, do you remember Any stories about money? Maybe you had some money that you lost during that time. I know my dad had a story about swallowing a nickel.
Probably watched to make sure they got it back too.
Yep.
That'd be his story, I'm sure. But anyway, no, like I told you the other day, we had a potato pit that we had our big gardens, and mother would can. We had plenty of vegetables, and would kill a pig, and they'd say cure it, and they'd make some kind of stuff that they would put all over it and wrap it in kind of a cheesecloth or some kind of wrapping, so it would stay in the cold part of the winter that we could have the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And we had our coal burning stoves, but we'd have to get the coal and keep our house warm. We had a coal burning stove in the living room and one in the kitchen where we cooked on. And
I think if we went through a depression like that today, I don't think a lot of people could make it because they wouldn't know what to do. Like your mom and dad, they knew.
yeah. Oh, we had, I can't ever remember being hungry. We still had plenty of food to eat, but it was just hard times, and everybody was going through the same thing back then. A lot of this I was told because I was born in 27, and it went into the 30s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, but President Roosevelt came in as President Roosevelt came in, and he done a wonderful job of being our president.
Mm-hmm.
And he died into his third term. That's when President Truman took over.
Yeah. What do you remember? Do you remember your siblings at all growing up between 1927 to 1937?
I guess, I could tell you about Herman. I told the story about Herman on the plow, and my dad taking him when we was out in Whites Valley, and he was plowing, and he took me up to the field where he was, and he put me on the plow with Herman, and while he was plowing, I was going around with him, and we had the horses, and he had a name for each one. But I said I wouldn't mention those names that he had.
How much older was Herman than you?
I think there was around 19 years and plus.
Uh-huh.
Not quite, it wasn't 20.
Yeah.
So there's quite a difference between the two of us there. In fact, your dad laughed and teased because this one guy I worked with that lived by Herman, I worked at Mountain Bell, and he worked there, and he thought Herman was my father.
And Vance had a kick out of that, I bet.
Oh dear. But Vance, my brother, I can remember Herman, but I can't remember, I can just barely remember. I can remember him and being out at Whites Valley with him, and he worked the farm, and I remember him being home, but after that, I imagine I was over maybe 10.
1937.
Or maybe 10, around in there when he married. And then he was gone, but I can remember Nina being there and living with us. And John, he lived in Fielding, and he had, what do you call them, snowshoes?
Mm-hmm.
In the winter he walked over the Long Divide and would walk to Clarkston to see her.
Wow, that's love.
Yes, it is. That's true love.
Then after they got married, he threw the snowshoes away?
I guess. They moved to Fielding and lived. So then there was just Sybil and Vance and myself. And I remember being there.
Now that was Sybil.
Sybil.
Right. I mean Nina. That moved to Fielding.
Yes, Nina moved to Fielding, and then there was Sybil and Vance and myself.
And Herman moved to Logan?
No, Herman and Jenny married, and they moved up west, just below the mountains, and theirs was the only home up in there.
Yeah. That caught fire, didn't it?
No, because today Herman and Jenny moved out, and other people lived in that home, and today Herman's and Jenny's great-granddaughter and her husband, she married a Godfrey in Clarkston, and they bought the home and they're living there.
That's neat.
So, but I'm also going to tell you a story about me and Sybil and Vance living in that home together. Vance was always so good to me and took care of his baby sister. Of course, we were the younger, but I remember this one day they had the car and the garage was in the barn. And Sybil had the car, and she brought the car home, and she took it out and put it in the garage. Well, Vance wanted that car. And I remember she come in, and I can't remember how it got started, but those two got in a fight. They were fighting, and my mother tried to separate them, and Sybil picked her up and put her down on a chair. But I can't remember it was over the car.
Uh-huh.
And that was funny.
Yeah.
So we had lots of good times.
Do you remember the address of the house that you grew up in?
Oh, we didn't have addresses then. And I wouldn't even be able to tell you what the address is now.
So if you,
It was just Clarkston, Utah.
if you were to come into Clarkston from Newton, as soon as you got into Clarkston, there's the Raffstein home going west, and then there's Sybil and Goody's house,
No.
your sister.
No, it was one of the Barsons, Dallas's cousin that built those first two homes, his cousins that were Rugder and Aaron Barson. And then just going west from the corner was Dallas and Sybil's home. And then you just went up west from their home to the corner and turned right, and in that same block was where Mom and Dad's home was.
Yeah.
And that's where all the kids were
And they have
born and raised. And my dad and Mom bought the home from his brother, my Uncle Henry Thompson,
Mm-hmm.
and Aunt Em.
So what do you remember from 1937 to 1947?
Oh dear. Just all the playful good times we had as neighborhood children, and as school. We got very close out there because we didn't have that much activity outside of Clarkston. And I remember as a small girl the first time they brought movies into Clarkston, and of course they were all cowboy movies, but they'd bring them to the elementary school, the gymnasium, and we could pay 10 cents once a week and go to a movie.
Huh.
So I
Where
remember
was the school at? Is it where Ross's, Butters' house is at?
Oh, that's where my father went to school. There used to be an old rock building back of Ross's home, and I remember it because when my Uncle Lou and Aunt Lottie moved to the Butters' home, that old rock school, he used it as a barn, and that's where my father went to school.
And the school that you went to was closer to where the church is now? The
Yes,
existing
it was
church
right
is?
next to the church was on the corner and the school in the middle of the block.
Yeah, where the park is now.
Yes. And we had lots of fun growing up in the school. We played ball and hopscotch, and I even played marbles with the boys and would win their marbles. But we done all those things. We always had activities and was always outside playing, and even at recess having fun doing things. And in the wintertime, growing up in primary and going up through the church, we always had good times, and our class would get together and have, one of the girls' father had a team of horses and his sleigh, and we'd go sleigh riding. He'd take us with bells ringing, and we'd have fun that way, and then we'd go to each other's home and have ice cream and cake. And
Is that the same sled that took my dad's ear off?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was or not.
So when you were 15 years old, how old were you when you went to North Cache?
Let's see. When I graduated from North Cache, I was 18. So, right out of elementary school, I went to 8th grade. And then I left 8th grade and went to Smithfield to junior high 1 year. And then I went on to North Cache High for 3 years.
And when did you graduate from high school?
1945. My high school years was the World War II years, because we would have our basketball games at high school and football games, but we could never travel to go to other games or see the team play other teams, only the ones that came to North Cache, because it was gas rationing at that time, and you could only have so much gas, and so we were never able to participate in our
Because they were using the
activities.
gas for the war?
Yes, yes. And we even had tokens that we had to spend when we went to the grocery store.
What did they look like?
Just little tiny silver round tokens.
Did they have a hole in the center of them?
I wish I had one. No, not that I remember. I don't think there was holes in them.
Huh.
But I remember as a little girl, Brig Griffin had his the grocery store, and
And that grocery store was north of the school, the old school and the church house.
yes, and it was just right below where my grandpa and grandma Jardine lived.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Mother give me some eggs I could take up and use the eggs to get different things, if it was a loaf of bread or whatever.
You would trade eggs
They
for
would
bread.
trade eggs, and I remember the Jensen store that we could go up and go in, and I liked that
And the
stuff.
Jensen store was up from Briggs's store to the west,
Right.
on
And
the corner.
And I remember it had the counters that you'd stand behind to get anything you wanted. That was a neat store.
Did you see a lot of people in high school go off to war? Was it a sad time?
It was a very sad time, and especially I remember when my brother left. It was a very sad time for me. And of course, we wrote back and forth, and he wrote me letters all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have one or two. I think I never gave you one. I gave one, I think, to maybe, did I give one to Cindy and Christine? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Letters that Vance wrote home to me, but it was a sad time. And the, names and that leave me, but at North Cache High School, our student body president, he graduated, and before I was, he was 2 years ahead of me. Before I got out of high school, he'd been killed in the war.
Wow, never even had a chance to have a family.
Never had a chance, and I remember, and he was there with us, and we lost several of the boys I knew back then. And in Clarkston we lost one,
And who was that?
and that was Vance Raustein.
And who was his dad?
And his dad was John Raustein, and his father's the one that gave me my patriarchal blessing.
Wow. Huh.
And my mother was very good friends with his first wife, Bertha, and I can't remember if her name was Bertha Nish or what, but she died, and then he married, I think, a second wife.
What was the atmosphere like after the war, when it was all over with?
Oh, now I can tell you, back after high school, I went through Smithfield Junior High through the war years. I went to North Cache High through the war years, and have to stop and think about all of that
Uh-huh.
through the war years. After I graduated from North Cache High School, I went to Logan because to spend a week because I had with a Dr. Merrill, a dentist. I had to have some teeth fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed there that week, and my cousin, her husband was in the South Pacific fighting, and we walked down by the telephone office, and I met a friend that asked me to go in and apply because she had, and they had to have more applications. And so as we stopped, she says, well, go in and apply and maybe you'll be lucky. And so I went in and applied, and Mr. Lee was the manager. And when I went in, he set me down and he says, your dad's Herm Thompson? And I said, yes. He says, you're from Clarkston? And I said, yes. He says, I know your dad. And I sat and talked to him for a few minutes. He says, just come and go with me up these stairs, upstairs. And he took me up to the operating room and he introduced me to Miss Sorensen. And she interviewed me because I was tall and I had long arms, and they were sitting on these tall chairs around the board, the switchboard. I could reach. I had a good reach, and that was late Friday afternoon. And I went home on Saturday, and when I got home on Saturday, my mother had a call that I was supposed to be Monday morning there at 7 o'clock to start training to be an operator. So I was out of school 1 week, and I worked and retired after 31 years of
31
service.
years. So you started work there in 47?
I started, no, 45.
1945?
Let's see, 1945 I started working there. And it was in the fall. Oh, and another thing I'll have to tell you about the war, we'd had some people that said the war was over, and our switchboard had light up, and they were ready. And they told anybody that was off that day when the war ended, they were supposed to come in. But the day the war ended, I was on that switchboard. And the telephone office was right downtown Logan, just a few steps off of Main Street. And the war ended, and the switchboard lit up, and there was so many lights, it was just lit up.
You couldn't keep up with it.
And we couldn't, well, it just blocked, we couldn't get through our calls. Even people calling long distance, we couldn't get through, because in those days we had to build up. If we were calling New York, we might go to Denver. They might send us to some place in between New York, and they'd have us hold until they got lines through to there. That's how I started. And but everything, we just couldn't get no place with our calls. But anyway, the band started, and people downtown, and cars honking. Gonna cry. It was something.
That's neat.
But it was nice because I knew my brother would be coming home. But I wasn't the only one.
So when did you retire from Mountain Bell?
I retired in July of '78, and our office terminated because that's when all this technology and all this was coming in.
I remember riding my bicycle down to where you worked, the telephone office, and it would have been when I was around 10 years old, 1970, and they had a button on the side of the building you could push and talk to the person you wanted to talk to. And I would always come down there and push that button and tell you hi. You remember that little button?
That little button was, we'd have to give our name and number in order to get in the door.
Uh-huh.
That's what that button was for.
Yeah. I never did get in the door, but I
Yeah.
remember pushing it.
No.
Always asking for you.
Yeah. Oh, my voice was so different from everybody else's that I could say, number please.
Uh-huh.
And they'd say, hi Thelma, how are you today? Everybody that knew me would know my voice.
And it seems like out in Clarkston they always had third-party lines.
We did.
I think Sybil's phone and Herm and Annie's
Some
phone.
of them had, what we would say is number please, and it was an R6 or whatever, and then we'd ring that many rings, go into that,
Yeah.
plug in, and then we'd ring that many rings to get through.
Well,
Yes, we were on party lines then.
Working at the phone company, you were able to be a little snoopy. You could find out what other people were talking about.
I guess you could if you're chief operator. We had supervisors, and they'd plug in with you.
They'd probably
And
shake
we'd
their
have
head.
so many supervisors, and then we had a chief operator that would go back and forth. And they always said operators listening in. But to be honest with you, if I ever listened in, I think I was too frightened to, because I thought I'd get caught. But as we went on and went into the new office on First East and Center Street there, they had equipment that they could even go down and listen. They would monitor, and we had management people from Salt Lake that would come up and check how our office was doing, and they could go down and monitor. I wouldn't have dared listen in, because you could have been fired.
Yeah.
So they said about, but I guess maybe there was some that got away with it.
Did they have a big party in Clarkston when all the soldiers came home?
Now in Clarkston, I'm sure they did, but I can't remember. They probably did.
So did Spencer go to the war?
My husband went to war, and he served. He said, what a sick feeling he had when they drove around by the White Cliffs of Dover. But he went to Germany to fight.
Was he in the infantry or?
He was in the infantry, in the army, in the infantry, and he was fighting in Germany when he was wounded. And he was flown into France, and he got wounded in the leg, and his leg was all, they had to open up his leg. And he was there taking medication and stuff in a France hospital till they were able to sew his leg back up. I think he was there, was it 2 months? I can't remember. But he came home on a Red Cross ship.
Mm-hmm.
And come back to the States.
Sure.
And it was right there after he got home that's when I met him.
There was somebody else that in Clarkston that got shot through the collarbone, underneath the collarbone.
I can't remember who that would be.
He would have been my dad's age,
yeah.
closer to my dad's age. He recently died maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Okay. And he lived in Clarkston.
Yeah.
Okay. Other than the one that was killed, I wouldn't have remembered that one.
So, how did you and Spencer meet?
Well, it was a Friday evening, and my cousin Lottie, she worked day shifts and had weekends off, but of course when I became an operator, I was working different shifts and late shifts, and then I was working weekends too. And every once in a while you'd get your weekends off, or a Saturday off, or a Sunday, but they generally kept track and tried to be fair with all the girls that worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I had worked, and I think it was about 6 o'clock, or maybe it was 8 in the evening. It was the summer, and I walked out, and I was standing on the steps, and I thought, and I wasn't only 2 blocks from where my apartment was from work, and I thought, oh, here I am alone, and I was thinking, do I want to go home this early, or would I like to go over to the Capitol to a movie? And I was standing there, and 2 guys come around the corner of where the service station was there on that corner.
Pretty handsome guy.
Yeah, he was a pretty handsome guy. And as I was standing there, he was with his cousin, and they stopped to talk. Mm-hmm. And but they asked me what I said I was just off work and I was just deciding what I was going to do. I said I need to go home. They said, well, they would give me a ride. I says, no. I says, I'm just here waiting for somebody. So I says, you go ahead and you go home. But he asked me my name and all about me and everything. And so he left. He and his cousin left and got in the car and left, and then I walked home. I didn't go to the movie after
Where
that.
did you live?
I lived, I lived on First East and First South. First East and First South. There was the
Just down below the little hill by the canal?
Yes, right next to the canal.
That was close to work.
I've got pictures. Yes. Like I said, I was just about 2 blocks and that's it from work.
Wow, that's
And
nice.
that's where Lottie, my cousin, was living at the time because after I got on, I lived with her in that apartment.
Uh-huh.
And,
And Lottie married Spencer's brother.
Spencer's brother Dean, but anyway, Spencer, finally, an operator his mother lived on 400 North, 462 on 4th North. And that's where they lived. And across the street, one of the operators had an apartment. And she became very friendly with Spencer's mother. And she was over there. And I gave him my name. But I shouldn't have. And back in those days, I guess you did. But I'd forgotten all about him. And he asked if she knew Thelma Phillips. And then she talked to me. And she said that he had a very nice mother and came from a very nice family, and she says you ought to meet him and get to know him. And so that's when I got to know him.
Mm-hmm.
He called me after
So
that.
Spencer lived on 4th North
Uh-huh.
and 465 East.
Let's see. Did I say 46? No. Did I say 465? 461, I think.
461.
East 4th North.
So that would have been on the north side of the road.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right in the middle of the block. And they had a great big deep block or backyard that went clear back in half of the blockway.
Yeah,
So he didn't live very far from Utah State University.
yeah. So, you remember your first date?
I think I'm almost sure we went to a movie.
Did you double date with your cousin and,
No,
and
no,
Spencer's
No,
brother?
I just went with him to the movie.
Uh-huh. At the Capitol?
Yes. But then after that, I learned that he'd been married and divorced
Oh,
and had 2 children.
uh-huh.
And so after that, I went with him maybe 2. The girl didn't tell me he'd been married and divorced, and he was living at home when he came back. In fact, he had to come back and be under doctor's care, checking his
Right.
wound for quite a while. But anyway, after he told me he'd been divorced and married, then I stopped. Because I'd been going with a guy from Clarkston and had a ring waiting for him, and I won't go into details about who that was because
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Right.
But anyway,
Did you ever meet his other children?
Oh yes, they were with us. They'd come to visit. His wife had already remarried when he got home, and he had 2 children. And yes, they would come and visit with us. They lived in Logan for a while. She met him. His wife met her husband. He was going to Utah State University, and then after we were home after the war, them 2 moved to Provo. So we didn't get to see that much, and then after that they moved to California. But when they come for visits, we get to see the children.
They claim that your generation is the greatest generation. Why would that be? And I feel the same way. Why is that?
Oh, maybe it's our times and what we went through, our struggles, and boy, that generation come together and supported the war. We done everything together. Our food was rationed. I mean, you could buy so much, but gas, I mean, there was a lot of things we had to sacrifice for back then. But other than that, some of the older ones would have to tell you more about that than I. But we still had good times.
So right after the war, the baby baby
Oh,
boomer
the
generation.
baby boom. I remember my husband became a fireman after we were married. And we bought our first little home across from Merlin Olson Park. It was called Central Park at that time. And it was the son of where I rented my apartment from. It was his son, and they were moving to California. We bought that first little older home, but it was a cute little house. And when they moved, they left their coal stove and coal burning stove in the living room and old furniture there. And some of it that I got rid of that I wish I had back because it was antique and it was some nice furniture. But that's where we started out our married life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody just was. But at that time, I was going to tell you, he became a fireman. When we were in that home and moved in, he was working at Borden's Milk. And he worked there before he went in the Army. His father worked there, his mother and his brother Dean all worked at Borden's.
Where was Borden's
And
at?
Borden's Milk, it was west of Logan, and it was down closer to where the fairgrounds is,
Mm-hmm.
in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And
So would he work there part-time and work at the fire station full-time?
no, he left. He put in his application to be a fireman and had to take the exam, and he passed it. And so he became a fireman, and that's when he left Borden's.
I remember in about 1968, when I was 8 years old, I would ride my bicycle down to the fire station just to see Spencer. So, and he would always give me a red plastic fire hat and a
Oh.
badge. That was about 1968. That was quite a ways away from home. But I rode the bike all the way there to see Spencer.
To see.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about the baby boom, and I'll have to tell you
Yeah.
what. One of the firemen that lived with him, and this is before we ever moved way out here, because when we moved out here, there was still not many homes out on 800 North and 4th East. But they had these little homes on 10th North,
Yeah.
and they're still there.
On Bonneville
And on Bonneville, and one of the other firemen lived there, and it was during right after they come home from the war, and he laughed because he says they called it, oh, what was it?
Fertility Flats.
No, Morning Sickness Square. That's what they called it, Morning Sickness Square, because they all come home to the soldiers and they got their wives pregnant.
Yeah.
And they always laughed about that. And
Those
I've
were-
always
those
thought
houses
about
were
that
just-
house as being Morning Sickness Square.
Those houses were just two bedroom homes, about
Uh-huh. Just
maybe
real small.
600 square feet.
And a little living room and kitchen and bathroom and 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of kids were born between 1947 to 64.
Oh, yes, yes. It was
So,
a baby boom area.
Was there a huge difference in from the time you were born to 1947 as far as the economy? Things changed. The economy changed.
Things changed, and people was able to go to Ogden and work at 2nd Street, and they were places for to work in the places where you build up for the Army and all of this.
Not only was it the boom of the baby era, the baby boomers, I think the economy was really, really good.
It did. It came back. I know when I first started for Mountain Bell, I started at $18 a week, and I thought I was doing pretty darn good. But then it was after the war and the union. They had the union, and of course we were all members of the union, and that's when they came in, and I was with AT&T, one of the baby bells.
Uh-huh.
A Mountain Bell was with AT&T, and that's when we would strike, and that's when our wages started. we got good wages and things started to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So the economy was a lot better. We done a lot better then.
So how big was the house that you lived in across the street from the park?
It
Was
was,
it a 2-bedroom or 3?
no, one.
Oh, 1-bedroom.
That's why we lived there 7 years, and that's when we moved out here in '54.
And you
Because it was we had a kitchen, and then you called it, at the side was just a little room with my cupboards and sink in, and then my kitchen was fairly nice size, because when we first moved there we had a coal stove, and then after we went to gas and I had a gas stove, but then we had a big living room and a bath and a closet downstairs, then you went upstairs, and it was a great big bedroom, one room upstairs, but it was a big bedroom, and I had my bedroom set in there, and then we had Ralph, and he went from the crib, and there was 3.5 years between him and Steve, and we got a single bed that we put in the corner for him, and then had the baby bed there by us. So we had the 2 boys upstairs with us, and that's when my husband decided we were going to sell and get a bigger house.
Mm-hmm.
So we did then.
That was 1947?
That was when we moved out here in 1954.
Uh-huh.
So
But Ralph was born in 47.
he was born in 47.
The first group of the baby boomers.
Right. Yeah.
And where was the hospital at? Just right close to the...
It was kitty
your
cornered
work.
from the temple.
Yeah.
The hospital was. It was the
Okay.
Budge Memorial Hospital. I have a picture of it. I just
Well,
had it.
there was a hospital across the street from the Tabernacle at one time.
Oh, right across on First East for the Mountain Bell where I worked, there was a roller rink on that corner. And then you went over, and it was the Cache Valley Hospital. So there was 2 hospitals in Logan.
So there was 2 at that time?
Uh-huh.
So
Cache
the-
Valley and Budge.
So Budge was up by the temple?
Right. Just kitty cornered.
So it must have been a brand new hospital.
Well, it wasn't brand new. I'm trying to think when this new one came. I wish I could remember dates.
I think
and
that's when
years.
my mom was born in that hospital. Now you were born in Clarkston.
I was born in Clarkston.
Uh-huh.
And your mother, she could have been born at the Budge.
I think she was.
Hospital.
Cache Valley
Oh, Cache Valley.
Yeah.
Okay. Like right across the street.
from the Tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
So who
And
delivered you?
Dr. S.M. Budge.
And he came out to Clarkston?
Uh-huh. My mother had all of us, her babies in Clarkston.
Huh.
And they were delivered at home.
Well, we don't...
Yeah. And most of the babies were at that time.
Yeah. So, just 3 years later, Steve was born.
Yes.
And that's when you moved into this house.
No, Steve was about 2 when we moved here.
Okay.
And then 5 years after we had Gary, and he was here.
So most of the family memories are right here in this house.
Yes.
So what was it like with 3 little boys from 1947, 54, and about, what, 57? Gary?
55.
55.
Oh, we had good times. My husband passed away when he was 12 years old and left his mother with the 4 children.
Uh-huh.
And it was hard for him, and his mother had a struggle, and his grandmother moved in with him.
Now you're referring to who?
My husband,
Spencer,
Spencer.
yeah.
And I'll keep this short, but yeah, he said it was hard. He can remember taking his little red wagon and going with his mother, and they'd sell the potatoes and their vegetables from the garden and go to different houses and that selling their
Wow.
vegetables and that when he was growing up as a small
How old was
child.
Spencer then?
So, well, he was just a
Probably
small
10,
child. Well, he
5
was
to-
over 12. He was over 12. He was the oldest, and his brother was just, I think, 1 or 2 when their father passed away.
Wow.
And it was hard for them. So, but when we moved out here, he didn't get the toys for Christmas. He didn't get the things that a lot of kids around him. And in that area where he lived, there was doctors and all of that was living all around him at that time. And but after we moved out here and had our Christmases, and he was making money and we was doing better, my mother, the kids' grandma, she and my dad would come over and they couldn't believe all the things my kids was getting for Christmas, because he just had to give those kids everything he didn't get. And I'd be so aggravated with him, but
Where was your Christmas tree? Right on the
right in the corner. Yes.
So what was it like Christmas morning with all the lot of giggling and?
Oh, it was fun. This little living room was just full of toys and bicycles, and it was fun. It was joyful. We always had a nice Christmas dinner, and we had a nice Christmas Eve. We'd all get together. Lottie, my cousin Lottie that married his brother, they always come down for Christmas Eve, or we'd go to Preston for Christmas Eve, and that was fun. We enjoyed that over the years.
And Spencer, he knew how to work. He was a hard worker.
He was a workaholic.
Yeah.
He became a fireman, but when I got pregnant, I'd have to go on leave, and we could have a year off. They give us a year's furlough. And I remember the one year Logan City, it wasn't curb and gutters at that time. It was ditches, dirt ditches, and the water. And
along Main Street too?
Well, I don't think Main Street,
yeah,
but a lot of the areas where we lived, and so they'd hire people to clean out the ditches and get them ready when the water came. And he even took jobs like that. If it was money to make, he worked and he done it, and he always had 2 jobs. And as the kids got older, he with other firemen, he painted. And
that was on their off hours, right?
Their
they
off
were on
hours.
24 hours, and then
they'd be their off hours, and he would paint.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Painting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And he also raised chinchillas.
Chinchillas. And at one time in our first home down across from the park, we had pheasants in the back. He built a new coop back in there, and we had chickens. He always liked chickens.
He had pheasants here.
No, not here.
Didn't he?
But he had some sheep down in the back. We had that all fenced in, and we had sheep back there. And but he had the chinchillas and baby chickens he raised. Yeah.
And he loved his shop. His tools were always in the exact same spot. They were never left around.
No, because you could take the tool off of the wall and it was painted black.
Yeah.
All blacked in where he painted it.
On those little pegboards.
Right. Well, it's not against the wall.
Yeah.
It was again. He had a big room.
But he was very, very meticulous with all of his stuff.
Oh yes, very.
Yeah.
It's still sitting there today.
Never lost a tool. It was always in the right spot.
Well, if it's lost, one of the boys has taken it, I guess. But when he passed away, I told him to go down there and just leave me what I would need and divide it out, but they never did, and all 3 boys have their lovely shops now and all the tools they want. They says when they come home they can go down there and get things, and when Gary comes home and stays with me, he says it's nice to be able to go down if he needs something to fix something, that it's there.
That's neat.
So, yes, they're going to have fun clearing this all out when I go. But it's been fun, and I've enjoyed all my family, and even the Jardine get-togethers. We had a lot of get-togethers through the Jardine family over the years, and then my own family would get together, and Scott, your dad, and your mother would get the little kids, and I've got pictures of up Logan Canyon having cookouts and being up there, and we done things together,
That's neat.
and it was fun.
So, when did your kids start driving? It would have been about.
Oh, they took driver's training, so I don't know how
Does Spencer take Ralph driving around and
Oh yes,
and
he took
any
the first
accidents?
2 boys. Let's see. Other than Steve after. No, it was before he was married. He was going with his wife now, and she lived in Young Ward. And we got a new car, a new Ford car, and we had was it the 56 white and red Ford? I think it was 56. But anyway, we gave that, Stephen wanted it, and we gave that to Stephen. We had it quite a while before we got another car. And we gave that car to Stephen. He demolished it out in Young Ward.
He rolled it or?
Well, he went off the road
Uh-huh.
and it was demolished.
Huh.
And after him, he had that before he was married.
Yeah. So there was a lot of kids in this area that they grew up with?
Yes. But I was going to tell you about driving. When Gary comes along, his dad made him wait. When they were coming, the guy to take him for driver's training, he was almost in tears. He says, I don't know what I'm doing. He says, I don't know how to drive. And his dad says, that's what they're here for. They're to teach you. So, poor Gary. But yeah, now what did you ask about the kids?
A lot of kids around in the neighborhood.
Oh, my boys never went without friends. They had 4 and 5 and 6, some of them, right in this ward, 10th ward,
Mm-hmm.
that they had close friends they all grew up with. And of course, they all went to church and in Mutual and had their basketball games and went with the scouts and had lots of good times.
So, do you remember when Ralph and Steve were in high school together? They were 3 years apart, so if Ralph was a senior, he'd be a sophomore, Steve.
Yeah.
So what was it like then?
Well, all I can remember in school, Stephen had more struggles than the other 2,
Mm-hmm.
and we had help and worked with him, and I feel like that's another thing I failed to say back, but I'll say he had struggles and we got help, and Stephen done really well after that. I mean, he had a hard time, but in his older age and after he was married, Stephen's done very well. Ralph done well. None of them went to college. In fact, Ralph, he went 1 semester and stayed out, and then he went to Vietnam in the war.
And they're all 3 of your boys are hard workers.
Yes,
Very hard.
and they've all had good jobs over the years and made good money.
Now, was Ralph the first one to go to the war? So did Steve go to the war at all, or?
No, because Mary was pregnant and at that time, and he had, I think his number was 23. I was hoping that he'd get a larger number. They went by numbers drafting, and so Stephen was like 23 or something. I can't remember. So that meant he would be going. But when they found out she was pregnant and he had a brother in Vietnam, he didn't go.
Mm-hmm. So did Ralph go right to Vietnam, or was he sent someplace else?
He went to
Saigon?
Texas.
Oh, Texas.
He went to Texas for all of his training, and then Atlanta, Georgia, and then he was married. He met his high school sweetheart, and they were married at Christmas time, and he landed in Vietnam the 1st of January after they were married in December.
And was he in the infantry?
He was in the infantry, the big red one. And he fought there. He landed in the hospital a couple of times. But he was a radio man. And he got the combination medal. They wrote us a letter where he was between his unit and the Vietnamese fighting, and was radioing back and everything, and what he did after and helping with the wounded and the dead. And everything. It was not a good place to be. That
But
was not a
he
good
did well
war.
as far as helping our country.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And then being a police officer, becoming a police officer all those years, he'd done very well.
Yeah. And then, so Ralph was in the police force in Ogden,
Right?
and then Steve worked at Thykol.
Yes. No, he worked at Logan Manufacturing. Was that a
That
Thykol?
was a Thykol, and it went
And
Logan
then
Manufacturing.
Logan Manufacturing, right.
And that's where DeLorean made the DeLorean cars.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And he worked there, and then when that folded and went, he looked for other work, and he got on at Whitaker's Construction. Has been there ever since, and has a very good job now over at
And Ralph was
Whitaker's.
with the Union Pacific.
Gary.
Gary, yeah.
Yes. In fact, Gary graduated from high school, and he went to work at Wurlitzer's, and he met this girl that worked at the front desk, and she had moved to Sandy. They had come from Omaha, Nebraska, and her dad was with Union Pacific Railroad and been on the board of directors. And her mother wanted to get back to Utah to where her family was. And so they moved back to Utah, and she went to BYU and didn't care for it, so come up to Utah State and got a job at Wurlitzer's and met Gary.
Well, we don't.
And that's where those two met each other. And when Wurlitzer's closed, them two was going together, and it's not what you know, it's who you know. And her father been with Union Pacific Railroad. In fact, he transferred and was in the Salt Lake area. He got Gary on at Union Pacific, but her father said after that it wasn't him that made Gary who he was and where he got to be. It was Gary
Yeah.
that done all the work, but he'll be retiring now in August.
Well, that's good. How many grandkids do you have?
I had 4 plus 2 that's just like my very own. That Ralph's wife, Patty, she
Mhm.
had the 2 little boys.
Uh-huh.
And they're just like my very own. So I'd say 6. And if I was counting great, oh dear, maybe about 7
7 great
or
grandkids?
8. Yeah.
Huh.
And maybe counting a few more with those that have come into the family with since grandchildren and that. So
Yeah.
I think we're into the. Maybe my family consists into the 20s now.
Mm-hmm.
Something 20. I better count them all again.
So what do you like doing now? Now that all your kids are gone and
Oh, I had all my friends and operators. There was 4 of us very close, and I had another one that was very close. And I've had friends over the years. And after I lost my husband, I always liked to work outside, and I was really an outside person. I liked to be out there working, and after I lost him, summertime was fine because I was busy. But when wintertime come, I just got fidgety and didn't know what I was doing here alone. So I went to job services, and they set me up. I went up to Utah State and worked with would you call it registration when they come into school up there at the library. And so I worked there just while the registration, and then I put in an application, me and the girl that was there, and to work at the library. And at the same time, I put in an application, and they asked me if I could spell. I says, well, I'm a fairly good speller, but I might miss some words. He says, do you have a good, this was job service. He says, do you have a good dictionary? I said, yes, and he sent me down to Herb Jones. And I went in and worked at the computer room, and worked there. And then I also went out in the fall and worked at the bindery where they put the books through, and I liked that really well, and I worked there 11 years.
Yeah, I remember when you were at Herf Jones.
Yeah, and I
And they
worked,
made yearbooks for
Yes.
all the high schools in,
right.
in the country, or just
It was around the western part of the states, and then we did some books for the Navy, and that was interesting. they had us do some books.
So when did you retire from Herff Jones?
Oh dear, let's see. I was 67 and I'm 88 now. So that'd be 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So 12 years from 88 is, let's see, 10, 12? Is that 12 years?
It's longer than that. Oh, you said 88.
67. Oh yeah, 20.
Uh-huh.
Be 20, maybe about 21 years maybe.
Yeah.
Since
So, so what do you do that's enjoyable now?
Oh, I don't know other than my church activities. I was a Relief Society historian, and I taught those younger children in Sunday school. I liked that over the years, and I just the firemen, we always had an auxiliary over those years, and then at Herff Jones, they asked me, and it was younger ones in management, to join their bunco club. So I joined that, and that was for a few years. We had that, and we still went out to dinner, and they'll include me to go with them. And I'm old enough to be all their mothers, but I enjoyed doing that. And I've had friends, and then right now at this time, there was 10 of us just on this one square block around there's some a little bit younger, but we go the first of every month to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 7 of us now, 3 that's gone. So I enjoy going with them, and we visit, the neighbors do. And in fact, there's 3 of us neighbors that always visited. Our neighbor, Marge Hoffman, but she passed away, so her son lived there at the home, and we still went over to see him and visit every night for about an hour in the summertime, and he has sold the home. He lives in California, and he has sold the home now, so he's moving. So I'll miss John. And then
go ahead.
I've had 2 other close friends. There was 5 of us, and 2 of them passed away, and there's still 3 of us. But now with my back, and the other one is older, we're all getting too old to.
When did you have back surgery?
In 2010.
So, you used to be quite the snowmobile rider.
Oh yes.
Was that in 2010 or before or after
That
your
was
surgery?
before.
Yeah, your back wouldn't have handled it.
No,
Huh?
my back wouldn't have handled it. My son bought this cabin up in the Uintas, the Uinta Mountains, and so I went up there and in the winter and stayed a week with them, and we went snowmobiling, and he was taking me, and he said, "Now," he says, "if you need me to stop, Mother, or if anything you want me to stop," he says, "just tap me on the back." I was holding to the seat. They had a thing up around the seat that I was holding so tight to that I'd like to have been able to pat him, but I didn't.
So you're going about 60, 70 miles an hour.
Too
maybe.
fast for me. And then after that, he slowed down. I really got mad at him.
Do all the grandkids come here once in a while? Do you have a family reunion?
Not as much. We were getting together every year, but for picnics or what, they would come, and we'd have it here on the patio, and they'd all come and be together. And then for years, up until, they went about 3 years ago, the boys did, we all had our trailer houses, homes, that we could go, but we'd go once a week camping in the year. And all 3 boys would get together, and all the children and that, and grandchildren, they'd take their tents, and we'd been every place at like Pinedale, Wyoming, and at that time my son didn't have his cabin, but we'd go in the Uintas, and we also went to Gray's River, and up and enjoyed Yellowstone Park, river rafting and fishing. We did all of that.
So those were all the... Go ahead.
Well, and then our favorite place, we go up Logan Canyon, and that's where we would mostly go because the kids, it was closer for them to come and go, and we enjoyed that in Bear Lake.
So you and Spencer and the kids used to go camping from the time they were little to.
Oh yeah, we had the firemen and we had friends and we had one couple. We became good friends, and we go up Logan Canyon and camp and picnic, and we had lots of good times together. Deer hunting, we'd go deer hunting, and I remember the first time that my husband and his brother Dean took Lottie and I camping. We went up Blacksmith's Park, and they laid down mattresses down on the ground and made our beds on the ground out in the opening, and we had a little trailer.
Uh-huh.
And that little trailer, me and Lottie ended up making our bed up in that trailer. And our legs hung down because the trailer was tipped that way. But we was afraid of the mice that we saw earlier. And we thought some animal would come and get us, so
Uh-huh.
that was fun.
So what kind of advice would you give to your, well, let me ask you this. What do you want to be remembered for as a mother and grandmother?
Oh, I would prefer being remembered as a mother and a grandmother. I mean, and our camping trips and doing things with the kids and going to their ball games. And as a grandmother, I've enjoyed the times we've had our picnics and being together, but all of my family is mostly out of Logan. I only have the one son that lives here and 2 great-grandchildren is all, and then the rest are in Salt Lake and beyond. I have 2 in Ogden, but the one's left and lives in California now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all away, and they've got busy lives and that, but other than if we do have something special, and at Christmas time I get together with them as a family. We get together.
With all the things that you've learned in your life from 1927 to now, what type of advice would you give your grandchildren and great-grandchildren and those that are going to be born that you never even meet?
Oh, the way our country is today and the way things are out there now I don't know. It worries me. And I just hope that they'll all do well. And do well in school, do well in the church, and just have good lives. And I have some children that are active in my church, but I have some that are not, and they're just wonderful grandchildren. And they're all good grandchildren, and just be good to one another, be good to your dad and mother, be good to your country and your church and everyone surrounding you.
Love life.
Love life.
Yeah.
Have a happy life.
Well, this was fun.
Oh dear, I'm not that good of a person to interview, Scott.
You've been good.
I've never done that before.
Yeah.
So this was neat. I enjoyed it.
Well, I'll have this on a website for you.
Oh my gosh.
So this will be fun.
Oh, it will be fun. Do you want me to? Oh, we don't want to put that wreck car in there.
Well, it'd be kind of neat for your grandkids and stuff.
The wreck car?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the wreck car of my dad's that Vance wrecked in between Smithfield and the railroad tracks going into Newton.
What about this picture right here?
This is me after Christmas at my home in Clarkston.
What about this one?
I'm going to tell you about this one. This is hitchhiking from North Cache High School down to Logan with my friends.
That was your friend there?
No, that's me. And this is your dad, my brother Vance, and they had dugouts up in the Aleutian Islands when he was in the service, and they had to dig their way into the dugouts. Did you ever see that one?
Uh-huh.
And this is him in front of a dugout up in the Aleutians. And this is Oline Hess. and he was from Plymouth, and he was a pilot, and he was in the Aleutians with Vance, my brother Vance, and he was a pilot.
Let's see some pictures of you.
I'm trying to come up now some more here. This is me with my cousins Lottie and Kay in Las Vegas. This is me and my husband
Where's this?
right here. He's got his eyes closed. That doesn't look very good. This is my Grandpa Jardine holding my nephew Tony. And this is before Vance left for the Army. And this is my brother Vance, myself, and our dad and our mother. Got lots of pictures of my brother Vance. Before I was married, going with my soon-to-be husbands.
How old were you there?
I was still 18.
And is this you here?
And this is me up Logan Canyon.
Is that after you're married or before? Or?
I don't know. I think that was before. It could have been after. This is my first home after we were married that we bought down on the island.
Is that just south of Central Park?
That's across the street from
Burlington
Central Park. Yes, on First East. This is the Jardine reunion down at, what's the park in Logan? Way down. Let's see.
This is a Yellowstone.
No, that's Logan Canyon.
Is that you and Spencer?
Yes. This is myself and my cousin Nadine Jardine Hess. And this was the day our babies were blessed. My baby Ralph and her baby Galen.
Okay, these are good here.
Okay, this is myself with my baby Gary.
And that's where
And
you
this
live
is,
now.
and here, let's get this one. This is me and Gary and Ralph and Stephen.
What year would that have been?
Oh, let's see. Gary was born in 1955.
That would have been in the 60s?
No, he's
Oh,
a
55.
baby.
Yeah.
So 55, he's still a baby. And he was born in August. That had to have been in that year of 55.
What about the picture right
Or maybe
below?
56. Which
Right
one?
below it.
This one? That's your Uncle Spencer and his brother. Don't think you want that one. And this is the two boys, Ralph and Stephen.
Let me get that one.
Got it?
That was over at my dad's house.
Where?
That one you just
This
pointed
one?
to. That's my dad's old truck.
No, that was your Uncle Spencer's truck.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and that's the Larson home and the one across the street. That was out in front here.
Okay. Tell me about this one here.
That's me and my cousin Lottie. She was 2 years older than I, but our home, we had a path right between my house, going past the barn and over the street to her house.
Now, did she marry
Dean,
Spencer's?
Spencer's brother, Dean.
Let me get that picture right there. Okay. Let me get this one.
That one.
How old were you there?
Oh my gosh. That house, well, it's got the grass and that. And Ralph was just a little boy. Oh, take about 8 years. And he was born in 68. That'd been, no, 48. He was born, no. He was born in 1947. 40, let's say about 55. He was born in. So, I'd have to go back and think here a minute. Lottie again up at her home.
Who is it?
My cousin Lottie.
And that's you and her.
Yeah, in their home in Preston, where they lived. I like to take pictures, so that's...
Tell me about that one.
This one was one he took, set up his camera. How is it you set your camera and then he ran and got in the picture with us?
On a timer.
On a timer. Uh-huh.
So point out all the kids.
Okay, this is my husband Spencer, myself, my oldest Ralph, second one, oldest Steve, and our youngest Gary.